With the release of Kingdom Hearts 3, why not take a look at one of the series' most popular songs, Dearly Beloved, composed by the masterful Yoko Shimomura. If you are unfamiliar with the Kingdom Hearts series, the soundtrack combines both arrangements of existing songs from other franchises, such as Disney and Final Fantasy, to original compositions such as the song we are looking at today. For a bit of context, Dearly Beloved plays as the main menu theme for all the Kingdom Hearts games. The song, while only 2 minutes long, loops seamlessly if the player does not continue with the game. This is due to a factor we'll discuss later on. I believe that Dearly Beloved was composed first entirely for the piano, and then various other instruments were added on top to complete it. The original version in Kingdom Hearts 1 was a lot more bare, only including the piano and a choir. The second game's version reorchestrates the theme, adding in a variety of instruments found in the orchestral lineup. The strings take the place of the choir in the previous version. You have your violins, cello, and double bass, with a sole exception of the violas, which I think would have been a tad too much. The string sections act as a unison, with an occasional cello solo rising out of the mix. A harp and glockenspiel at first only hint at the main melody of the song, which is played in the piano, but later on, after the introduction, highlight the piano. The piano and harp trade places in a way, from the introduction to the first section. For secondary instruments, or counter melody, Yoko includes a French horn, a clarinet, oboe, and flute. As you can see, the woodwinds follow a subsequential pattern down, starting with the clarinet, and continue with the oboe, and then finally the flute, each taking place of the previous, while the French horn doubles with the oboe in section 1b. Speaking of sections, Yoko only composed 2 primary sections with an introduction to begin. However, these 2 sections are very similar to one another. Yoko wanted to keep this piano melody continuing throughout all the sections of the music. This also coincides earlier with the point I made about the loop point before. It's an easy job to loop a song that orchestration-wise stays the same. Compared to Kingdom Hearts 1's version, which begins the melody immediately, Yoko holds it back here for a more serene and mysterious atmosphere. That way, when the melody does hit you in the next section, it becomes much more impactful. This mysterious atmosphere is accentuated by the chord played in the strings in this intro, a melancholic G-sharp major 7th. I love the way the harp sort of outlines the piano melody that we'll be playing later. It falls down the C, G, F, D, and then back to the C. These notes are the exact ones played in the piano melody. For example, let me show you here. So it starts on C, then this harp actually goes down to D, but the piano melody goes up to this one, and then it repeats. Also note the use of octaves in the harp. This sort of foreshadows the octaves we'll be hearing in the piano soon. Yoko also pulls off this brilliant dovetailing technique between the harp and the glockenspiel. Dovetailing is a melody transition technique that allows one instrument to sort of tail into the other. So when the harp descends here, further in its lower registers, the brighter and higher pitched glockenspiel takes its place halfway through. Again, you see the melody being constantly swapped around from instrument to instrument. First from the strings here, and then the harp, then glockenspiel, and then there's a solo cello here, and then it moves to the clarinet, This ability is effective due to how it presents multiple sources of sound that excites the ear. You never want a long continuous melody in only one instrument. Now we move on to the melody that everyone remembers. Before looking at everything else, let's first take a look at what makes the piano melody stand out. Notice how the left hand arpeggio is played in eighth notes, while the melody up top is played in quarter notes. This might seem obvious, but think about it. If both the left hand and right hand use the same type of notes, such as quarter notes, the melody would just not stick out as much. In this song's way, the left and right hand are distinctive from one another. See again the use of repetition in both hands. You have these four measures here, so the pattern essentially stays the same in each. In the second variation, instead of going down to the D sharp, the composer instead opts for the C minor add 2 chord. I wonder if Yoko actually composed the song by selecting only add 2 chords to use. As a last note, the prophecy of the harp octaves comes true as the piano begins its octaves in quite a high register, all the way up to C and G8. This octave doubling continues throughout the rest of the piece. On to the strings, see how each section of the strings plays in only a specific range. The violins, for example, leave space for the cello and double bass by only using this interval here. The only function for the entire string section is to, at this point, serve as a pad for the piano. After the piano melody has been established, Yoko then begins adding more instruments in, first the harp, then the clarinet. So let me solo those instruments here. Looking at the clarinet in this section, it is clear that it is a middle ground instrument, meaning that it's not quite in your face as the leading instrument, but it is certainly not held barely audible in the background. As a composer, you have to control which instruments serve in these three categories: foreground, middle ground, and background. Failure to do so can result in a lack of clarity. Now let me play the entire section with all the instruments. Again, as a last note, like in my previous videos before, notice the dynamics of these strings, how they sort of breathe in and breathe out with each chord. The most obvious difference between this section and the last is the switch from clarinet to oboe as the secondary melody. I always found the oboe to be somewhat a longing instrument, even when it's played in major, so it's the perfect choice in this melancholic song. With this oboe melody, I want you to pay special attention to how the composer allows each instrument to be given the spotlight. First you hear the introduction of the oboe in the previous section, and then the attention shifts to the piano here. Then the oboe comes back in, then the piano, and then the oboe comes back in again. Using this sort of back and forth melody switching prevents the listener from focusing too much on one instrument, and allows them to enjoy the piece as a whole. This technique is even more noticeable in the second half of section 1b, when the French horns enter. Now we have 3 instruments that vie for your attention. In my opinion, 3 instruments simultaneously in the foreground is near the limit of what we can keep track of. In my opinion, 3 instruments simultaneously in the foreground is near the limit of what we can keep track of. The final melody instrument, the flute, functions here as a doubling instrument to the violins. So let me solo those 2. This section mainly develops the previous melody we heard in the oboe. They're exactly the same in the strings, but as you can see, the flute kind of tails off at the end here. Notice how the piano is perhaps the most dynamically loud of all the instruments, playing at a near triple fortissimo level. Additional triad chords are added in the right hand, and with the left hand continuing the arpeggiating pattern. And near the end of this section, the harp again transitions us to the next section. So here is the entire section played with all the instruments, including the harp, beginning the section. The solo cello we heard all the way back in the intro returns and this time plays the melody we just heard an octave lower. Now it's given more focus than the flute because note how the strings atop the violins only play the single C note. Also, again on the cello, the solo cello, combined with the minor chord shift at this point, along with the expressive vibrato of the cello, it really gives the section a mournful emotion. Another instrument from the beginning, the glockenspiel, here adds additional shimmer to the harp, though only in a few places. At last, the harp once more concludes the section. What's interesting here is that it almost seems to slow the piece down by trailing off in its last few notes ever so subtly. Like I stated before, this flute point works so well because the piece never really went anywhere to begin with. Had there been a B section, there probably would have been a section dedicated to transitioning between the two sections. Now it's that time again to play the song in full. Take special note of how in the intro, the harp sort of foreshadows what the piano will be playing in the next section. And in section 1a, how the piano is given the sole focus at this point in the song. In section 1b, how Yoko orchestrates 3 instruments at one time in the foreground, the piano, the oboe, and the French horns. And then in the last couple sections, the emergence of the second theme played in both the flute, strings, and later on in the cello. and lastly the slowdown of the harp to transition us to the loop. Yoko Shimomura's beautiful piece strikes an emotional chord with the many who have played Kingdom Hearts, and even the many who have not. I believe that this is due to two reasons. One, that Yoko kept the piano melody at the forefront throughout the song. This melody is repeated so often it becomes ingrained as something familiar to us. The second reason is her ability to allow each instrument its own space to breathe. Too many composers I see nowadays seem to lump the entire orchestra in one section. Yoko, however, carefully selects which timbres of each instrument suits the song best. The key aspect about being a musician is confidence in your own craft. If you find a melody like Yoko Shimomura did, express that melody to the best of your ability. Don't shy behind effects or add too many instruments. Often, simplicity is the key when creating effective and compelling music. Thanks for watching this analysis of Dearly Beloved from the Kingdom Hearts series. I thoroughly enjoy putting these videos together, and I hope I can show you the tips and tricks the great composers of the past have put into their songs. Have a great and wonderful day.